I'm John Layzer. I'm Director of Interagency Programs for Seattle Department of Transportation. I've actually lived in Northeast Seattle and roughly Wedgwood neighborhood for about as long as Renee's been in Pinehurst, or maybe a little longer. And recently been spending more time in your neighborhood working on the Northeast 130th Station project, as well as the projects with the city of Shoreline up at the I-5 interchange and along 145th and Sound Transit's 145th BRT project. I'm here today to talk about a study that SDOT completed earlier this year, really wrapped up mostly about almost a year ago. I'm going to do my best to present this study. I'm not the expert on the study, but I know a fair amount about it, and I'll do my best to answer your questions, and we'll go from there. And if I can't answer your questions, I'm happy to follow up and bring information back. But thank you for attending tonight. And I guess, please, I guess Renee will monitor chat if you have questions during the presentation. It's a fair number of slides. So Renee, I'll ask you to just keep me honest on time. And if there's more or less that I should be covering, please feel free to call me out. So the title of the study, knowing that the Northeast 130th station was going to be developed, as well as the what's called the Shoreline South 148th station, light rail station, as well as Sound Transit's BRT project along Lake City Way and 145th Street, also known as State Routes 522 and 523. Knowing that all those things were coming together, we wanted to do a study about future access to those stations, and particularly the 130th station, because it doesn't have a park and ride lot, is not, has certainly some access challenges. And so we wanted to make sure we were figuring out how people are going to get to the station. Let's see if I can make this work. So what I wanted to do today was provide an overview of the access study that we completed, talk to you a little bit about how it's structured and the recommended projects and priorities, give you an example of some of the what we call the cut sheets or detailed sheets of those projects, and talk about where we are in terms of next steps. This really is a planning study. There's not implementation money behind it. So as we're moving forward, we're working to coordinate with other projects and pursue future funding sources. But it does give us an idea of what we think our target is in terms of things that we want to accomplish in the station area. The area we studied was bounded by Lake City Way on the east and basically the interurban trail, or just west of Aurora, on the west, and from North 115th Street on the south to North 145th Street on the north. So about almost a mile in every direction around the 130th Street station, the future 130th Street station. I actually borrowed an old presentation, but I did update this graphic today based on the most recent information. We completed this study in February 2021, so we're just a little bit beyond that. And if you've been out recently, you've seen that the Shoreline 148th Street station is moving right along. They're still planning to open it in 2024. With the realignment process that Sound Transit went through this past year, they're now leaning into moving forward with a construction and opening of a Northeast 130th Street station in 2025. Final action by that on the Sound Transit board is expected in early 2022 to approve that final push towards opening in 2025. And then the bus rapid transit, or BRT project on 145th, that will connect the North Lake communities, Bothell, Lake Forest Park, and others to the station at 148th. That service is expected to begin in 2026. So a lot of construction ahead of us in this neighborhood. Previously, as Renee mentioned, the original date for 130th Street Station opening was 2031. There were times during the realignment discussions that it could have been later, but I think everybody's pretty excited about it moving into final design and construction now for opening in 2025. This planning process, I was not directly involved in a lot of this planning process, but in 2019 and 2020, there was a series of engagement processes as we developed the study. First, sort of general information gathering, and then workshops, both public, in person before COVID, and online, as well as targeted outreach to identify potential improvements. We went through an analytical process to evaluate potential improvements and try and narrow the field of potential projects, and then came up with a set of 18 recommended projects that are currently summarized in the study and are things we're looking at moving forward. What we heard from that outreach, not surprisingly, a lot of these themes probably are front and center on your mind if you live in the neighborhood, that we've got a lot of areas with no sidewalks at all, or upgrading sidewalks and bike facilities and street crossings to make it safer to walk and bike and access these stations in the future. In particular, better walking and bike conditions along Northeast 130th and the major corridors, 130th and 145th crossing I-5. The 130th overcrossing, like many of the freeway overcrossings, is a particular concern: narrow sidewalks, noisy, high volume traffic. And then also a lot of interest in improving walking connections around the Jackson Park Golf Course. In developing the project list, we started with all of our existing modal plans. We have a bicycle master plan and a pedestrian master plan and a transit master plan, and looking at suggested improvements in all of those plans, as well as the community engagement that I mentioned, and looking at planned projects, these neighboring projects with the City of Shoreline and Sound Transit. We identified over 90 potential projects, and we worked with a project team to try and, in some cases, bundle or group those projects or consolidate them otherwise. And then we went through an evaluation process to screen out which ones were priorities. And I'll talk a little bit about the criteria for how we got down to 18 projects. We took that through our own internal city staff and agency review, and again, brought it out to the community, and that resulted in our final list of 18 projects and reports. Renee, I believe that in the invite, you did include a link to the full report. Is that?
I did, and I actually just sent it in the chat as well.
Excellent. So I would encourage you, it's a very thorough planning report, so it'll have a lot more detail than I'm covering here. And if you're lucky like me and you have two screens, you can even pull it up on the side if you want. But hopefully this is a large enough image for you to read on your screen. It's pretty scattered because there's a lot of information. The 18 projects, not surprisingly, cover many of the key corridors throughout the neighborhoods surrounding Jackson Park. And so primarily just for the convenience of being able to present it and talk about it, we broke it down into three general geographies: the area west of I-5 between 115th and 145th, which are called the west sector. The northeast sector is the area north of 125th and south of 145th. And so some a little additional focus there because of the bus rapid transit project, which will be adding bus rapid transit stations at 15th and 30th Avenue Northeast. And then the southeast sector, that the Pinehurst neighborhood and the 125th Roosevelt corridor. We also looked at, with these 18 improvements, this graphic strips away a lot of the extra markings and gives you a clear picture of sort of the concept here. And the concept really is that you have some tier one improvements, highest priority to some degree. They're sort of foundational. They really are the direct links to the future transit hubs. And so they really provide the access to the rest of the network. The tier two projects in slightly thinner lines reflect improvements extending out from those core tier one improvements. And then the tier three projects further extend the network and in particular connect in to the Bitter Lake and Lake City urban villages. So that's sort of the way that the recommendations are structured. It's not that none of the projects right now, or very few of the improvements I'm describing here are currently funded. And so it's not that tier 1 projects are necessarily the highest priority, but this is sort of a good way to think about them. Some of the tier 3 projects, for example, may be eligible for funding sources that make it easier to get some of those done. Or we might be doing a project on one of those streets that makes it a little easier to get done than maybe one of the tier 1 projects that might be more expensive. So what I'll do is I'll talk through a little bit about each of these sub areas and give you a flavor of some of the priorities, the highest priority or the tier 1 priority projects, and some of the opportunities or challenges for implementation. So with the west sector, this graphic shows the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 projects within the west sector. You can see that the tier 1 projects really focus on the 145th and 130th corridors, and the key connections to the future stations. And then the tier 2 projects really establish the east-west and north-south spines, if you will, for bicycle and pedestrian travel. And then the tier 3 projects, again, radiate outward and help connect the rest of the neighborhood with safe pathways. The report is really detailed, so it includes what we call a cut sheet or a preliminary concept design. Hard to call it a design because it's more of a narrative description, but a concept for what we're talking about with each of these improvements. This first one I picked is right here, connecting to the 130th station, and it's one of the real challenges is that Northeast 130th overpass, and then a shared use path along 130th west of the overpass. You can see from shoot, I think I lost a slide somewhere. I dropped a slide, but what I'll tell you is that each of these projects we evaluated in terms of the safety, which is a very high priority for us. So looking both at accident data as well as observed experience or subjective experience, looking at connectivity and mobility as it relates specifically to the stations themselves, equity in terms of providing access to underserved or disabled communities and others who are challenged in our transportation network, livability, meaning connecting the community centers and other destinations in the community, implementation feasibility, that is how easy it would be to implement this project, as well as the community input that we received throughout the process. 130th, as an example, was a very high priority for the community, and we think it's really important both for safety, and for that safe connection to the future station. But it is challenging in terms of implementation. It's a very high cost improvement. It's not a project that's currently funded, but it's something that we'd like to set our eyes on in the future, or find sources for in the future. Almost at the other extreme in terms of feasibility at the moment is crossings of Northeast 145th. And I say that because the city of Shoreline is currently designing and has funding to start constructing improvements on Northeast 145th. So as we work with the city of Shoreline, their first phase of their project does plan to improve crossings at First Avenue and at Corliss, actually adding a pedestrian signal at Corliss. And then future phases would make these other improvements at Ashworth and further west at Aurora and in that vicinity. So that gives you a flavor of the types of projects and how we're able to or not able to implement any of them right away. And I'll touch on some of the other sub areas to give you a similar flavor. In the Northeast sector, again, you can see that the highest priorities were the Jackson Park trail, or the tier 1 priorities were the Jackson Park trail improvements. And we've shown both an actual potential improvement to the park trail itself, or a parallel set of improvements on SDOT right-of-way. And then the stations, if you will, along Northeast 145th, the bus rapid transit will actually not have a station at 25th. That station was dropped. So 15th and 30th, but there will be local transit stations still at 25th. But you can see that those major nodes are a priority. And again, the tier 2 project on 15th Avenue Northeast to sort of create that spine, and then other tier 3 projects to extend to the community. The Jackson Park Trail improvements is again an example of a high priority, but a very high cost and challenging feasibility. I was talking briefly with Renee before we started about this, but we looked at 2 options, one that would literally improve the pathway through the park. If you've ever walked this trail, you know that it's very steep between the ponds and Thornton Creek and Fifth Avenue Northeast. So it's a really challenging trail in terms of accessibility. It would be a parks project if it were improved. So we identified a parallel option that would be on street. And the challenge there is there's a gap in the street network through the very south end of Jackson Park, just east of, shown here as Roosevelt Avenue Northeast, but it's actually 10th north of 125th. So west of 10th, there's a section there of unimproved right-of-way that would be fairly expensive to improve and make accessible. And then similarly, we do have, I'm sorry to jump around here, also identified again improvements to Northeast 145th corridor and crossings there. And again, some of these improvements will be constructed as part of Sound Transit's bus rapid transit project. So some pieces of this will move forward. In the Southeast sector, really the focus is on the Roosevelt 125th corridor and the 8th Avenue Northeast corridor. And so this sheet shows an example of the 125th and Roosevelt potential improvements. Some of the immediate station area will be improved by Sound Transit. So you'll have widened sidewalks and new bus zones in the immediate vicinity of the station. But the rest of this corridor remains sort of a unfunded good idea for us to look at for future funding sources. So again, I blew through that. There's a lot of detail in the report. I encourage you to look at it. And I will try to answer any questions you have as well. But in terms of next steps, we're really focused right now a lot on coordination with Shoreline and Sound Transit on their projects, and trying to make sure that within the footprint of their projects, they're doing all of the things that we want, both for access tomorrow and for future compatibility with those other projects that we identified. And as I mentioned, Shoreline is, they're currently at 60% design for corridor improvements west of I-5, and they're planning to construct over the next few years the first segment, which would go from I-5 to Corliss. And they're also planning a interchange project that would reconstruct the interchange with replacing the signals with 2 roundabouts. Both of those projects they're hoping to construct in 2023 and 2024. And then Sound Transit's Northeast 130th station, as I mentioned, they'll be going to their board in the first quarter of next year, they hope, to get final authorization to move forward with final design and construction, aiming to open the station by 2025. So working to try and make sure that the, if you will, the footprint of the station, including the immediately surrounding streets, are improved. And then the bus rapid transit project, as I mentioned as well, will be making improvements primarily to the intersections of 15th Avenue Northeast, 30th Avenue Northeast, and then Lake City Way. We are also working with Sound Transit, both the bus rapid transit project and the Northeast 130th station project in ST3 had station access enhancement funds that were budgeted. Some of those funds may be used by Sound Transit to construct some of the street improvements in the immediate vicinity of the stations themselves. But we're working with Sound Transit to identify what funds might be available to extend further with some of those improvements. And then SDOT itself is coming to the end of its Move Seattle levy. And we're expecting that we will be seeking to renew or bring forward a new transportation funding package in 2024. So this planning work provides us sort of a good foundation to start to identify priorities that might be funded in that package. Just a reminder that, you know, we've prioritized these improvements in this neighborhood, but with a statewide, a citywide funding package, you know, we'll need to consider citywide priorities. Similarly, if we're applying for grants or other funding sources, it's a broader competition. So challenging to fund all of these improvements, but we've got our work program laid out for us essentially. And we'll continue to coordinate with other city projects. So as we're doing paving improvement or other projects or implementing, as we update our priorities for implementation of our bike master plan or pedestrian master plan, some of these projects may get pulled in as priorities that we can otherwise accomplish. And just to give you an example of this, I didn't fact check or update this. This was from February, and many of you may know more about some of these things than I do, but this just showed a scattering of projects planned, small scale, mostly small scale projects planned by SDOT throughout the study area. So it just gives you a sense that some of these things will be built potentially in pieces. I know, for example, I was talking recently about a sidewalk project on 30th Avenue Northeast, where there's a gap in the sidewalk south of 145th. And that project is in design and moving forward. And we're looking at completing that last length between 137th and 145th, hopefully as part of a Sound Transit funded or partially funded station access project. So again, trying to cobble together the pieces. That concludes the slides that I had to share. I did have other slides covering other portions of the plan. If people had detailed questions, again, I'll do my best to answer whatever I can. And if I'm not able to answer your questions, I'd be happy to follow up with Renee after the meeting. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Renee.
Perfect. John, thank you so much. And I'm going to, do you mind if I think we can both be seen if we go.
How do I stop share? You wanted me to stop share. There you go.
Sweet.
Excellent.
Sweet. Okay. And then can everybody see, can you guys see both of us?
I can see both of us.
All right. Everybody choose. Okay. And they say, yes. Okay. So thank you. That report is huge.
It is a very thorough report. There's a lot of good information in there. Definitely provides us a foundation for work going forward. So there were some questions last time. Yeah. If people have questions, please put them in, and I'm gonna I have a list that I'm tracking, and I was going to just start with, just because part of why we invited you here, and we're really grateful that you took
time out of your Wednesday night to do this. There were some questions last time, and then I'll go into the questions this time.
Great.
So, and I think some of the stuff you've answered. So how will the Jackson Park Trail be impacted by the station?
Yeah. So actually, I will mention something about that specifically. Not the Jackson Park Trail exactly, but one of the things that we were hoping to accomplish with the light rail construction was a better north-south safe route for biking and walking, other than the gravel path that adjoins the park itself. And so we're actually working with Sound Transit to create a two-way shared use bicycle and pedestrian path on Fifth Avenue Northeast when they reopen that and restore it. So we're working with them right now on that. It affects the interchange project, the Northeast 130th station project, as well as the Linwood Link construction project that's closed the street right now. But so that's not directly related to the park, but it does provide, I think we're pretty close to agreement with Sound Transit and Shoreline on how to get that done as part of their construction projects. So we would create that north-south, more accessible route for bicycles and pedestrians. The east-west path connecting Jackson Park to the areas to 10th Avenue and areas east, as I mentioned, is really challenging, both to some degree because of jurisdiction, but also because of grades. So the parks project within the city park, it would be a parks project, and I'm uncertain. I'm not familiar with the details of what was studied in the study, but just from my experience on the trail, the major challenge to the trail is the grades, and there's no easy way to make that go away, other than like building a big bridge or something like that. Similarly, the parallel route on street, I think, was the sort of most cost-effective method that might have been identified as an alternative, but still has a gap in the street network that would have to be filled. And again, the grades are very difficult. So,
it's the trail has huge grades.
Yeah,
it's a good workout.
It is a good. Yep, gets your blood flowing. For me, earlier this year, my knee was hurt. I couldn't even walk the trail because it was just too much. So I think that's a real challenge as we think about investments. We really need to think about how we make it accessible for people with disabilities or safety. So it's a big challenge for those routes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And let's see, I'm just going through, and thank you for that, John.
Yeah.
Will there be bike? Oh, I think you've answered this. Will there be? Oh, I see. So will there be bike lines continuing on Fifth Avenue south of 130th?
Yeah, so we did identify sidewalks south of 130th as a priority. We're doing some work with Sound Transit on the just on the immediate vicinity of the station south of 130th. But we don't have funding for continued sidewalk south of 130th. In terms of bikes, what the study identified was 8th Avenue Northeast as a neighborhood greenway. I believe, again, I'm not totally current on this, but I believe that the neighborhood greenway on 8th Avenue south of 117th has been completed. Am I right about that? Or
I think I see people on it. It's the Northgate Way portion of it is definitely that connects Maple Leaf to Pinehurst. That piece, that transition has been completed, and there are people using it. Di, I know you're out there. Di, are people using the? Is the greenway completed? It's a greenway
south of 117th. Yeah, and so I think the concept here was to extend that 8th Avenue greenway treatment north of 117th to provide a safe bike and pedestrian corridor up to the station, essentially up to 130th.
So there's a question on that came up. So actually it was Di who's asking. So he says the safety improvements for Northeast 117th, number 10, has been put on hold for 2 years. Do you know why? The project was partially funded by Your Voice, Your Choice. Are you familiar with this, John?
No. 117th. Can you repeat that just so I make sure I get it?
This,
And I'll look for your
and
notes.
I'll email this to you afterwards.
Yeah.
And I'll put these for everybody else on the call. I'll put all these out in the folder that I'll send to you when I email the download from after the call. So the safety improvements for Northeast 117th, Project 10, has been put on hold for over 2 years. Do you know why? The project was partially funded by Your Voice, Your Choice.
And I do not know the answer to that.
Okay.
And just so I'm clear, when you say project number 10,
I think in the plan, it might be project number 10.
okay, that doesn't match my numbers, but I can certainly follow up on that. I apologize, I don't know the current status.
Thank you. You haven't memorized all of that entire massive
Right,
study?
right. No, and I, anytime it's been a while since I've been to a community meeting like this, and I know that you and others are more familiar with your community than I am. I'm confident of that. So if I can answer your questions, I'm doing really well. But if I can, I'm happy to follow up as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
And okay, we're almost through the call. And I think there was a question, will Fifth Avenue be open all the way north to 145th? And is this correct that it's going to be a one-way street northbound?
Yes, that's correct. So our plan was to reopen 145th sometime probably later next year, later in 2022. That was the original plan. With the 130th station funded for construction and the Shoreline Interchange project funded for construction, we're working with both Shoreline and Sound Transit on whether it makes sense to reopen or whether it makes sense to keep it closed through the construction of those projects. Keeping it closed through the construction of those projects would help keep construction vehicles off neighborhood streets. So there's some real benefit there to the community. But there's also we understand that it's access that community used. And so there's also a public benefit that's lost there. So we're working with Sound Transit and Shoreline to figure that out. When we reopen, the plan is that it would be north of 131st, or actually north of the church driveway, just north of 131st. It would, south of that driveway, it would be two ways and would have access to the station. North of the church driveway, it would be one way all the way to the 145th off ramp. So southbound 5th from 145th would not reopen. But excuse me, the east side of the roadway would then be converted to a two-way bicycle and pedestrian pathway. So there'd be a good backbone for bicycles and pedestrians in the corridor.
Thank you. Are there experts to review the safety for bus stop location and pedestrian safety to cross over to the station? Particularly thinking of the proposed eastbound bus stop location.
Yeah, I think I can't remember if did you send me that question in advance? I thought I saw that question. So I recognize as currently planned, and I think as planned, both bus stops will be what we call near side, which is frequently in transit jargon not preferable because you don't want people crossing in front of the buses. But because of the configuration of Fifth Avenue and 130th, and then the Roosevelt, that's the design that we've landed on. And so that is something that SDOT traffic operations and safety staff, as well as King County staff, have agreed upon as the best approach. There will be pretty significantly widened landing areas for passengers, and so we think it'll work well. And the crossings themselves and the signal systems associated with those will all be enhanced and reconstructed.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
And apologies for this, I'm typing and
Yeah,
and somebody asked for the Facebook page link. I put that in the chat and in the answers. We have a 130th Street Station Facebook page.
excellent.
So what plans, and I think you touched on this a little bit. The question is, what plans does SDOT have to secure funding for the projects identified in the study? And I'll add on to that. How can we advocate for those?
Yeah, it's a tough question for me. I think the study actually had some suggestions about ways to get involved. Probably the biggest upcoming opportunity for funding multiple improvements would be through that future funding package. So SDOT is just starting to develop a new citywide transportation plan that will essentially combine all of our modal plans, and that'll be the foundation for what we expect will be another transportation funding measure in 2024. This plan will be part of what gets baked into that. So, to the extent that these improvements are priorities, become priorities citywide, that's probably the best opportunity. We continue to look at, I was just in a conversation this week about upcoming federal funding grant opportunities in 2022. And so SDOT is constantly looking at potential funding opportunities and trying to find projects that can fit with those opportunities. The challenge with the biggest challenge with these improvements is that there's no base funding for many of the improvements. So where I'm able to leverage, if you will, Shoreline's investment or Sound Transit's investment or Sound Transit station area funds, that really helps me in terms of, for example, if I want to apply for grant funding, I need that local funding to start with. So the building blocks, the building blocks are there, but the funding is definitely a challenge. I don't have great advice for you on how to advocate for funding
So
for
the
the specific projects.
The Northgate Ped Bike Bridge in 2011 or
Yes.
2012, there were a number of people in our group also who were the part of that initial group that advocated for it. It took 10 years.
Right.
And it took many sources.
Yeah.
And it happened.
Indeed.
So I think we're ultimately optimistic.
Yeah, I will say, I was just
willing to do the work.
Yeah. I was trying to remember because Chris, the project manager, had actually, identified suggestions. The Your Voice, Your Choice program was one of them. But somewhere in that study, there is a suggestion of other places where you can advocate your choice, your voice, your choice. The Neighborhood Street Fund, implementation of our modal plans and our and so forth is really another area. But and we update our implementation plans for those every couple of years. So there is outreach associated with that, so people will have an opportunity to have input into that.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I'm not very fluent on that.
This is helpful. And I would say this is a personal comment, is I think that as we move forward and we're going to have we expect to have the land use discussion in 2023, 2024.
Yeah.
It would seem that some of the decisions around transportation infrastructure, things like sidewalks, some of the sidewalks, if there's multifamily housing being built, it's my understanding that the developers are required to put in sidewalks when they build those.
Typically, yes.
Yeah. So it's not like we're going to have the same land use pattern we have there today.
Yeah.
but there's a lot in flux, and we don't know everything yet. We'll know more
Right,
as we get
right.
2025.
And those, I think actually the sidewalk I mentioned on 30th Avenue Northeast, there's also a private development that's coming in that may complete some of that sidewalk as well. So it is part of how some of these things may be built in pieces. Yeah.
Let's see. And okay, this is a long question.
Okay.
What are the next steps beyond the study, and when will they occur, especially to obtain funding? And 3 to 4 years from now is a very short time for design and implementation. One big change after this study, Costco is planning a new warehouse store in Aurora between 135th and 137th. This will change traffic in the area, especially along 130th and along Aurora, because it's using an existing building that is likely SDCI and will not require a traffic study to be done by Costco.
Huh. I didn't know about this. Is that where the Sam's Club was?
It is.
Is that okay?
It's
Just
recent
curious.
news.
Yeah, yeah. No, I hadn't heard that. I don't have a great answer for you. We don't have a fixed strategy for, if you will, stewarding and implementing this sub-area plan. It really was an effort to get out in front of potential opportunities, particularly for coordinating with the station project and with the other projects. So we wanted to make sure we got out in front so that those projects were built right, if you will, in terms of the street improvements associated. And then again, it provides an opportunity, it provides further input as we look at prioritization of our bike master plan, ped master plan, other planning exercises. And it provides input into the citywide plan we're developing, which will establish a new, potentially, if the voters approve, a new set of dedicated funds for implementation over the next decade. So it's not a really solid answer. We don't have a specific plan for implementing this. I think actually part of the reason we called it a study was to help communicate that it's not a plan per se. It's not something that we think we can accomplish in the next 10 years, all of these things.
And
Yeah.
And I remember when we did the Northgate plan, the Northgate transportation plan was done.
Yeah.
15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And not everything was done, but some things, again, for example, the Northgate Ped Bike Bridge was on that. It was noted in the 90s as something that would be, if there were to be light rail, that would be something that would be important to have. So still 10 years out from the station opening, it was something that people, that work had already been done. And so it's clear that, at least I personally, and other people may disagree with me, but I hear that you're identifying projects that are important and thinking about them. So when the funding opportunities become available, or we can realize these are really important, we have to go find that funding. Yeah.
That's really well said. I think that's exactly what we're doing. It's sometimes, I would love to have, even for our bike master plan or our pedestrian master plan, we sort of say the same thing, which is that they're an aspirational plan, and we're going to try and implement as much of it as we can in the next 5 to 10 years. But we don't have funding or a plan to fully implement everything in those plans in that time frame. But understanding what our priorities are certainly helps us when funding opportunities arise, or when we have a chance to prioritize citywide.
And I would also say the 30th Avenue Northeast sidewalk, again, almost about 10 years ago, a pot of money became available, and people and there was an ask, and that was identified what that needed to go towards, because there's such a vulnerable community that uses that side, it was very terrible before. And it's been bit by bit by bit that's been completed. It's exciting to hear that it might actually go all the way to 45th.
Right.
So it doesn't, it's expensive, and it doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
And 15 years ago, Jackson Park Trail wasn't there. So, um, and if I'm irritating people by being so, if I'm naive, I apologize, because people will disagree with me. But so the safety improvements for Northeast 117. Oh, wait, we've talked about that. Sorry. And okay, here, can you speak about the methodology of how you evaluated equity criteria in the project prioritization?
I'm going to look for my slide that I thought I had that I didn't include, to show you the narrative of that. It's a very good question. And I apologize, just give me a moment.
No,
here.
take your time.
Okay, I'm going to share again if I can do that.
Yep.
So this describes the, this was a slide that I thought I'd included, shows the evaluation measures and provides a little bit more detail about how those were implemented. For equity, the goal was to address the needs of the public, of people who are underserved, including communities of color and non-English speakers, vulnerable travelers, including people with disabilities, people with low income, seniors, and children. And we have a variety of tools that we can look at as we do that. You know, we have demographic and other data by census tract and so forth that we can use as a sort of objective measure and somewhat objective measure. And then we also look at places where we have known access needs for vulnerable populations, such as senior centers or churches or other community facilities. So each project was rated on the extent to which the improvements served known vulnerable populations, including, you know, a benefit recognized of providing all ages and abilities bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And again, really looking at access to senior facilities or subsidized housing, public schools, community centers, and other service providers. And I mentioned the demographic profiles, looking at our city race and social justice index. We have a GIS tool that has identified priority areas in terms of racial equity and income equity throughout the city. So those are the tools. It is a somewhat subjective scoring criteria, but we basically rated each project along each of these criteria, essentially on a scale of 1 to 5, or 0 to 5, or 0 to 4, I guess. And that's what I can tell you about. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
that was helpful. And if the person who asked the question, if you have a follow-up question, feel free to put it in the chat. Thank you, John.
Thanks.
I have two more questions. And one is, can you say whether the future transportation funding package in 2024 would only support those projects already identified in this study, or fund additional SDOT or partner King County Metro projects? Is the scope of that package known, and do the projects identified in the study depend on that package being approved in 2024?
So the short answer is, you know, the funding package absolutely would not be limited to these projects. This study looked really pretty specifically at, you know, station access and how to knit together access to and from the stations and within the community. But for example, it doesn't address paving needs or aging signal equipment or other transportation needs in the area. So the future transportation funding package is likely to cover all of those transportation needs, including bridges and other assets throughout the city. So this would just be one type of input into that. also, frankly, our world changes pretty rapidly. And so, Renee, you mentioned the Northgate plan. I'm confident that if I looked back at that plan, there are probably a couple of projects that never got built. And if you looked at it, you could figure out, why, because something changed or it didn't make sense anymore. And there may be things that we didn't think of in that plan 10 years ago that ended up happening. So it is a dynamic process. This is our best snapshot of what we think makes sense and sort of our target moving forward, but it's not intended to be all inclusive or excluding other potential improvements. So
perfect. Thank you. And I think there's one last question, and I'll double check to make sure there weren't any more added, but this one is for 8th Avenue Northeast, south of 117th. I guess it's a comment. I do believe it's complete, so that it's back to that greenway. However, due to its steepness, people on bike may avoid it and use 5th Avenue Northeast instead.
Yeah, I think that's a real challenge that we've run into with our greenways, is that we're trying to find safe alternative routes that are flat, but frequently are parallel to, not on the major vehicle arterial. So I think the same situation in my neighborhood, where the greenway, it's on the other side of the hill from me. So if I'm riding my bike, sometimes I ride along the ridge of the hill, which I won't tell you where I live because we get into a whole different conversation. 35th Avenue Northeast. So there could have been bike lanes on 35th Avenue Northeast, but there aren't.
That is a totally different conversation. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions. I've gotten people I'm getting messages from people who really appreciate your answers, John.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to say thank you for coming out. Thank you everybody for joining. The follow-up will be, John, when you have a second, if you could send your slide deck when you have a second, and I will send out an email follow-up that will have links to the slides, the recorded video, and then links to documents. I have a folder that's accessible to everybody. It's a Google folder that has the video links to the videos and slides from the other sessions that we've had as well.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I definitely owe you the follow-up on Northeast 117th, Your Voice, Your Choice project. Renee, thank you very much for organizing this. And certainly to anybody out there listening, if there are other questions that come up, feel free to pass them along directly to me or through Renee, and look forward to seeing you another time.
Perfect. Is it okay for me to send people your email address in the when I send it the email?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. I'm sure I guess they could find it anyway, but I just
yeah.
And I'm asking you on air. I'm asking you.
No. It's totally fine, and I can't answer every question, but I can easily triage and send to people who can. So that's a good way to get that done if you have questions.
And actually, I'm just going to make sure everybody hears this too. Is that I'm really grateful you made time to be here tonight, because the person who had worked on the plan, Chris, he's been moved to another role at SDOT, and so you are basically pitch hitting right now.
Yeah, that's right.
So
hopefully it didn't show too much. But.
It did not show, and we really appreciate
Right.
appreciate your time and effort in all of this. It's a pleasure.
Great. Thank you very much, Renee.
Thanks so much, John.